the scream never came. That was what haunted people most, the idea that somewhere between midnight and dawn, a young woman with her whole future ahead of her was attacked in her own bedroom, and no one heard a thing. Emily Carter had spent her entire life dreaming of the moment she'd leave her small hometown and become the first in her indigenous family to earn a university degree. She had pushed through every barrier, financial hardship, self-doubt, the weight of generations of expectations, until finally, with a major academic scholarship in hand, she stepped onto the campus of Ridgeview University determined to prove she belonged there. Emily was 20 years old, quiet but confident, with the patience of someone used to working twice as hard to get half as far. Her family, close-knit, deeply traditional, endlessly supportive, had cried the day she left. She promised them she'd bring home a diploma that would lift all of them a little higher. To save money, Emily shared a small off-campus apartment with her friend, Zoe Miller. Zoe was outgoing, messy, impulsive, everything Emily was not, but the two balanced each other well. Their apartment was a little old and always smelled like lavender candles Zoe burned to cover the scent of the downstairs restaurant's fryer, but it was theirs. A tiny island of independence. But Zoe came with complications. She had an on-and-off boyfriend, Mark Turner, whose temper was infamous among their circle. He had already broken into the apartment once after a fight, and Zoe had filed a protective order that she enforced only when it suited her. Emily stayed polite, but inside, she hated the volatility that followed Mark like a shadow. She worried, not for herself, but for Zoe, who refused to see danger in the man she kept letting back in. That night, the night everything changed, had been ordinary at first. Emily had spent hours studying at her desk, highlighter stains on her hands, textbook spread open like wings. Later, she and Zoe dressed up and took a rideshare to a nightclub near campus. It was loud, crowded, and smelled like neon lights and cheap perfume. Emily didn't drink much, she never did. She swayed to the music, laughed with her friend, and by the time they got a ride home, she was exhausted. Around 2 a.m. the apartment lights flicked off. Zoe went to bed, then got up again around dawn, restless and irritated after arguing with Mark on the phone. She left the apartment in a hurry, forgetting, or not caring, to lock the door behind her. Emily was asleep, she figured. It would be fine. It wasn't. When Zoe returned later that morning with a mutual friend, the apartment was too quiet. The small living room felt colder than it had hours before. A half-empty coffee mug sat untouched on the counter. The hallway light buzzed faintly. Then Zoe opened Emily's bedroom door. She dropped to her knees before the scream finally tore through her. Emily was gone, her life taken in an attack so brutal the police couldn't determine at first which blow had ended it. A glass liquor bottle lay nearby, cracked and sticky with blood. Her bedding was in disarray, her room violated in every way imaginable. And on the floor near her was a single handwritten note that made detectives' skin crawl. There were no signs of forced entry. No neighbors heard anything. And from the very beginning, everyone sensed the truth, this hadn't been random. Detectives arrived within minutes, but the scene inside the apartment felt like a lifetime of damage compressed into one room. The morning sun leaked through thin curtains, illuminating details that were almost too horrific to take in. Emily lay motionless beside her bed, her dark hair fanned across the floor, her face bruised beyond recognition. The liquor bottle, heavy, imported, and usually kept on a high shelf, was shattered near her shoulder. Detective Hannah Reeves, a seasoned investigator with a calm voice and sharp intuition, crouched beside the body, her brow tightening. "This wasn't frenzy," she murmured. "This was control." Zoe trembled on the couch, wrapped in a paramedic's blanket, her breathing uneven. She kept repeating the same broken sentence, "I thought she was asleep. I thought she was asleep." Her friend, Mason, sat beside her, pale and silent, staring at the officers as if afraid to blink. The apartment showed no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Emily's phone, backpack, and jewelry were untouched. For Reeves, this narrowed the possibilities in an instant. The killer either entered willingly or entered quietly through an unlocked door. Zoe's forgotten lock now loomed over everything. Reeves guided her through the night step by step. Zoe admitted they had come home around 2 a.m. She fell asleep. Around 5 a.m., she argued with Mark over text, nothing unusual there, and left the apartment without thinking about the door. Mark wanted to talk, Zoe didn't. She slammed it behind her, hurried down the stairs, and didn't look back. That gap, that fragile, unguarded window between dawn and morning, was when someone walked inside. The coroner performed a preliminary assessment. Emily's injuries were severe enough to suggest rage. The state of the room indicated a potential assault before the attack. And then there was the note, messy handwriting, uneven letters, found inches from her body. It read like a taunt, or possibly a warning, but detectives could not immediately determine whether it was genuine or staged. Word spread quickly across campus. Professors whispered in hallways. Students formed prayer circles on the quad. Emily's family arrived within hours, faces streaked with grief, their pain filling the police station lobby like air too heavy to breathe. Her mother stared blankly at the wall as detectives explained the timeline. Her father clenched his jaw, silent and rigid, his shoulders shaking despite every effort to hold himself together. Reeves promised them answers. But answers were slow in coming. Mark Turner, Zoe's volatile, unpredictable boyfriend, was the first person detectives sought. His record included a break-in at the same apartment months prior, and he had violated Zoe's protective order twice. Officers found him at his workplace, confused but defensive. He insisted he hadn't left home that morning, that he hadn't been near the apartment for weeks. Still, he agreed to provide DNA and fingerprints. Zoe herself was also questioned extensively. Not as a suspect, at least not officially, but as someone who might know who Emily feared, who might have seen something, who might have let danger inside without realizing it. But Zoe insisted Emily hadn't been dating anyone. She hadn't been fighting with anyone. She had no stalkers, no grudges, no secrets. And yet secrets were there, in the voicemail Emily had received days earlier, the one detectives recovered from her phone. A distorted voice, low and slow, whispered something unintelligible, ending with a sound that resembled a chuckle. Tests revealed nothing useful. By the end of the first week, the investigation stalled. The DNA found at the scene was partial, degraded. The palm print on the liquor bottle was smudged. The note's handwriting didn't match Zoe, Mark, or anyone close to Emily. Detective Reeves stood in Emily's empty room late one night, the silence thick and suffocating. She stared at the walls lined with university syllabi, scholarship forms, and small photos of her family. This girl was going to change her life, Reeves whispered to herself. Someone had no right to take that from her. But without a suspect, without a lead, the case began to slip into the cold. Until something surfaced, something small, almost insignificant, that would eventually crack everything open. The small detail that restarted the case came almost by accident. 2 months after Emily's death, as campus life struggled to return to normal, a new forensic technician named Caleb Breyer re-examined the evidence boxes. He had no personal connection to the case, he simply had a habit of reviewing unsolved files during slow shifts. When he reached the liquor bottle, he noticed something the earlier team had dismissed, a partial palm print on the upper curve of the glass, clearer than the smeared fingerprints below. He ran it again. Nothing matched. But this time, Caleb logged the unknown print into a new national database that had come online only weeks earlier, a system capable of comparing partial palm patterns, not just fingerprints. Detective Reeves didn't expect much when she received the update. Cold cases rarely reanimated themselves. Still, she approved the upload and moved on to her growing pile of active investigations. Meanwhile, life around the case continued to fracture. Zoe spiraled. Guilt clung to her like a second skin. She changed majors, changed jobs, avoided her old friends, and spoke of Emily in quiet, shaky sentences. She told Reeves she was barely sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emily's room as she found it, still, ruined, and wrong. Mark Turner was cleared after his alibi held. He had been miles away, seen on traffic cameras at the time of the murder. Even so, he didn't escape suspicion from the public. Students whispered. Neighbors glared. He grew angrier, more defensive, until he moved out of town altogether. The case had layers, and each one peeled back revealed nothing but air. Detective Reeves kept pushing. She retraced Emily's last weeks, the late-night study sessions, club meetings, calls to her mother, part-time tutoring job, and the quiet nights at home. Every person who had crossed Emily's path in the month before her death was interviewed. No one held resentment toward her. No one raised alarms. Then there was the voicemail, the eerie one left at 1:14 a.m., less than an hour before Emily died. For months, technicians tried to clean the audio. They enhanced it, isolated frequencies, slowed it down. The voice remained distorted, mechanical, untraceable. Some believed it was a prank. Others thought it was the killer. Reeves felt it was connected, but with no proof, the voicemail stayed a ghost in the case file. By the 6th month, Emily's family held a candlelight vigil on campus. Hundreds attended. Lanterns floated into the sky, rising in trembling amber light. Reeves stood at the back of the crowd, hands in her coat pockets, wondering how many offenders were bold enough to slip among mourners and watch the grief they'd caused. Years began to pass. Emily's room was emptied. Zoe moved away, desperate to outrun the memories. The university planted a small memorial tree in Emily's honor. Every year, her family visited the campus, leaving flowers at its roots. Reeves hated the quiet routine of those visits, they felt like reminders of failure. But the case refused to die completely. Forensic science advanced. Databases grew. And every year, Reeves resubmitted the DNA profile found under Emily's fingernails, hoping technology would catch what humans had missed. Then, in the 9th year, nearly a decade after Emily's life was cut short, a match surfaced. A man arrested in a nearby county for an unrelated offense had a partial DNA overlap. At first, the system flagged it as low compatibility. But a deeper analysis, run automatically through the upgraded software, revealed something unmistakable. The man was a direct match to the unidentified DNA from Emily Carter's scene. Reeves froze as she read the notice. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. She had spent years staring at dead ends, and suddenly a name, a real, tangible identity, was glowing on her screen. A name she had never encountered before. He wasn't a friend. Not a classmate. Not a neighbor. He was a complete stranger. And yet, his genetic profile appeared not just in the DNA, but in the partial palm print recovered from the shattered bottle, the same print Caleb had uploaded years earlier. For the first time in 9 long years, the case had a pulse. His name was Daniel Reed, a 32-year-old drifter with a thin criminal record, petty thefts, trespassing, and one arrest for breaking into a shed behind a bar. Nothing violent. Nothing that hinted at what he was capable of. Nothing that connected him to Emily Carter or the university. Detective Reeves stared at his file in disbelief. "How does a man like this end up in her bedroom?" she muttered. "Why Emily? Why that night?" She ordered a full background sweep. Daniel had grown up 2 hours from Ridgeview, bouncing between temporary jobs and unstable housing. He never attended the university. He never lived near Emily's apartment. He had no documented ties to Zoe, Mark, or anyone else connected to the case. But one detail stood out: he worked briefly at a liquor distribution warehouse the same year Emily was killed. The brand of bottle used in the attack was part of that warehouse's inventory. The coincidence tightened like a knot. Reeves requested a re-examination of the bottle shards stored in evidence. A forensic analyst pulled up the old laboratory photos, rediscovering the partial palm print on the glass. This time, with modern imaging software, the match to read was unmistakable. The ridge detail aligned perfectly. DNA. Palm print. Two independent links. Reeves moved fast. Daniel was already in custody on an unrelated burglary charge. She and her partner drove to the county detention center, the weight of 9 years riding with them. When Daniel entered the interview room, he looked ordinary, thin build, faded t-shirt, tired eyes. Not a monster. Not someone who should have had the power to destroy a family. Reeves slid the DNA report across the table. "This is you," she said quietly. "Found under Emily Carter's nails." Daniel's jaw tightened. A flicker, barely visible. Then she placed the palm print photo beside it. "You held the bottle that killed her." His breathing changed, shallow, quick, but he didn't speak. Reeves leaned forward. "You went into that apartment. You attacked her. You left a note. Why? Did you know her? Did someone send you? Did you follow her home?" Daniel didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the wall, unfocused, as if he were retreating somewhere far inside himself. His lawyer ended the interview minutes later. But silence didn't matter. The evidence spoke loudly. The district attorney approved charges within hours: first-degree murder, with added counts of burglary, rape, and sexual assault following further DNA evaluation. When news reached Emily's family, her mother collapsed into her brother's arms, shaking with a grief sharpened by sudden clarity. Her father's voice broke as he whispered, "We finally know." For nearly a decade, they had lived with a hole in their lives, a question mark where justice should be. Now, that empty space was beginning to fill, painfully, but undeniably. Campus students who remembered Emily shared the news across social media. Her memorial tree was surrounded again with flowers, handwritten notes, and small candles flickering under the evening sky. Zoe, now living in another state, answered Reeves's call with tears. "A stranger," she whispered. "He didn't know us. He didn't even know her." The realization ripped open old wounds. For so long, she had feared she'd somehow brought danger into the apartment. Learning it had been a man with no connection, a man who simply walked into an unlocked door, left her shaken. Reeves, though relieved, felt the weight of a darker truth: someone like Daniel rarely chose a victim at random. Somewhere, hidden in memory or routine, there had been a point where Emily and Daniel crossed paths, a brief moment she never recognized as dangerous. Now came the hardest phase: building the airtight case that would finally force Daniel Reed to answer for what he'd done. It was time to revisit every detail of that long-forgotten night. Detective Reeves spent the next several weeks reconstructing a sequence of events that had been buried for 9 years. She traced Daniel Reed's movements through old employment logs, transportation records, and witness interviews from the era. What emerged was a clearer picture, one that showed how proximity and opportunity had intersected in a tragic, irreversible way. Daniel had been working late shifts at the liquor warehouse during the month Emily was killed. The route between his workplace and the convenience store near Emily's apartment overlapped. Surveillance footage from a gas station, long archived, placed him in the area at least twice that week. He had walked those streets often, sometimes cutting through the university neighborhood to reach the bus depot before dawn. So he didn't know her, Reeves concluded, staring at the timeline pinned across her board. He saw her. Maybe once. Maybe twice. Maybe that was all it took. A young woman returning home late from a nightclub. A quiet street. A door left unlocked. It wasn't fate, it was vulnerability that had lined up with a predator's wandering path. When prosecutors began preparing for trial, they realized the case needed more than DNA and palm prints. They needed a narrative, an explanation for why Daniel entered the apartment at all. Motive wasn't required for conviction, but juries leaned heavily on understanding why. Reeves dug deeper. Former co-workers described Daniel as restless, easily agitated, often pacing behind the loading docks during breaks. He had mentioned crashing anywhere he found a door open during his transient years. The phrase chilled Reeves. It matched too closely with what happened to Emily. The trial opened on a rainy morning nearly 10 years after the crime. Emily's family filled the first row, her mother with trembling hands, her father rigid with controlled heartbreak. Zoe sat near the back, unable to bring herself closer, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. The prosecution delivered a slow, deliberate opening argument. Emily Carter was attacked in a place she believed she was safe. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of opportunity, a violent act committed by a man who entered through an unlocked door and chose to destroy a young woman's future. They presented the DNA evidence with surgical precision. The palm print. The genetic composite released years earlier, which had eerily predicted Daniel's physical traits. The note left at the scene. The voicemail that, while still unintelligible, placed a chilling timestamp close to Daniel's known movements. Daniel sat stone-faced, his eyes empty, his posture unmoving. His defense attorney attempted a different strategy, suggesting contamination, mishandled evidence from the early investigation, and the absence of a direct connection between Daniel and Emily. But every argument wavered under the weight of the DNA match. And the palm print. And the silent truth that Daniel had never once, in any interview, offered an alternative explanation. Not guilt. Not innocence. Nothing. Zoe took the stand on the third day. Her voice shook as she described coming home that morning, the creeping dread, the moment she opened Emily's door. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I should have locked the door. I should have protected her." Reeves watched from the gallery, wishing she could shoulder that guilt for her. On the seventh day, the prosecution introduced the final piece of evidence, the liquor bottle shard. Forensic experts explained in careful detail how the print was found, catalogued, dismissed, and then rediscovered years later. It was the turning point. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell into hushed stillness. The foreperson stood, voice steady. "We find the defendant, Daniel Reed, guilty on all counts." Emily's mother collapsed into quiet sobs. Her father bowed his head. Zoe pressed her hands to her mouth, relief and grief tangling inside her like a single unbearable force. Detective Reeves exhaled, a breath she'd been holding for nearly a decade. Justice had finally spoken. But justice, she knew, was not the same as healing. Not for a family. Not for a community. And not for a young woman whose life had been stolen in the quiet hours before sunrise. The verdict echoed through the courtroom long after the jury was dismissed. For a moment, the world felt still, suspended between the weight of the past and the fragile hope of what came next. Daniel Reed showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs, but it didn't matter. His silence no longer held power. The truth had been spoken for him. Outside, the sky had cleared. A thin beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the courthouse steps where Emily's family gathered. Her mother clutched a framed photo of Emily, a simple portrait, sunlight on her face, eyes full of a future she never got to live. Her father stood beside her, shoulders heavy but eyes lifted for the first time in years. "This doesn't bring her back," he whispered to Detective Reeves, "but at least now we know. At least now, she can rest." Campus students held a small vigil that evening beneath the tree planted in Emily's honor. Candles flickered along the walkway. A wooden plaque at the base of the tree read, "In memory of Emily Carter, a student, a sister, a daughter, a dreamer." The crowd was filled with students who hadn't even been enrolled when Emily was alive. Her story had become part of the university's memory, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the strength of community. Zoe stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale in the candlelight. She hadn't returned to the apartment since the trial began. Too many ghosts lingered there. Too many memories of the friend she lost. As the candles glowed, she finally let her shoulders unclench. "It wasn't my fault," she said quietly, as if saying it aloud made it real. "I didn't bring him there. It wasn't my fault." Reeves, standing a few feet away, heard her. She nodded. Zoe had carried the heaviest burden of all, the kind that grows in silence. Now, at last, she could begin to set it down. The university established a scholarship in Emily's name, awarded each year to a first-generation student pursuing higher education. It became one of the campus's most meaningful honors, a living tribute to a young woman whose dream had once been the same. As for Daniel Reed, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During sentencing, the judge spoke with quiet finality. "You stole a future. You stole a family's peace. Today, the law takes away your freedom in return." He offered no apology, no explanation. Some people feared that made him even more dangerous, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself, sometimes it slips through an unlocked door in the early hours of morning. Detective Reeves continued her work, though Emily's case stayed with her. In her office, a small copy of Emily's memorial photo sat on her shelf, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a promise. A reminder that even when justice is slow, even when hope flickers, the truth can still be found. In the years that followed, Emily's story was told and retold in classrooms, community centers, and safety seminars. Not to frighten, but to honor, and to remind people that vigilance matters, compassion matters, and every single life carries meaning. Her family returned to the memorial tree every anniversary. They brought flowers, prayers, and stories. Stories of the girl who studied late into the night. The girl who believed education could lift her entire community. The girl who laughed softly, loved fiercely, and worked harder than anyone around her. Stories that kept her alive. And as the wind moved through the branches of her tree, the leaves rustled with a quiet, enduring truth. Though her life was stolen, her legacy remained, rooted, unwavering, and forever reaching upward. In the end, justice found its way, not quickly, not easily, but with the steady persistence of those who refused to let Emily Carter be forgotten. And though her story closes here, her light continues in the lives she changed, the people she inspired, and the future she never stopped fighting for.